You're watching VATV, bringing Brookline home.
Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I'm your host for A Livelihood, New Adventures as We Age. And today I have a real pleasure to bring to you, and that is we're going to be meeting with Alan O'Hare once again. And Alan is a playwright and a psychologist and a community organizer. And he today is going to be talking about a new book called Mary B. And we also have Mary B. with us. So welcome to the two of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen.
This is wonderful. Yeah. It's especially wonderful to be here with Mary. She's always a joy to be with. Yeah.
This is a treat.
So tell me, Alan, now how did you get to know Mary B.?
It was several years ago. I was the director of a program in the region, in the Walpole, down that area, the Norfolk County region. I was a director of community education.
Here in Massachusetts.
Here in Massachusetts. And I provided lots of community service programs, and a group of women called the Sewing Sisters contacted us. They wanted to make a donation to a program that we were running calling the Girls Center, which was supporting girls and women's voices and visions. So they made a wonderful contribution, and they wanted to give it to us at a luncheon. And the Sewing Sisters had a luncheon, and they invited us, and I came, and I got up to thank them, and as I thanked them, I'm a storyteller as well. I thanked them with a little story I was telling. And when I finished, then Mary B. Here stood up and said, "Well, that was wonderful, Alan."
I remember.
And then she said, "I'm a storyteller also." And then she started telling a story, and it was love at first sight. And we just met regularly from that point on, where we just shared stories. I mean, and Mary, well, you can tell more about your stories as a teacher. And we just, so we had this wonderful chemistry of just talking and listening to stories. And then there was a point at which Mary moved to New Jersey to live with her son.
Son Donald.
Yeah. And then you went down there to live. And I remember she invited me to come up to her house, and her house was being ready to be packed and boxed away and all of that. And I remember looking around feeling so sad because it was the last I was going to see of Mary. And she said to me, "Oh, don't worry, dear." She had thought it all out, and she said, "I have all these stories." You remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yes, so we would write. I would write to him and share some of my memories of growing up and so forth.
Yeah, and so I was thinking, well, that's nice, and but every month there would be this one, and sometimes more than once a month, there'd be this wonderful letter to me, but not so much about what she was doing now, but another memory has come to me, and then she would just say that, and then I didn't write back to her as much as I would call you.
That's true. That's true.
And you would say,
"Hello, darling."
And then
You like that.
I do. And then we would have this conversation that would last about an hour. on the phone, and we just talk about everything, somewhat about the letter, and then other memories that came to you as being a teacher.
Right.
And I would take notes all the way through. So I took notes on all our conversations, and with her permission, I told her. And
What do you think prompted you to take notes?
well, their stories were so fascinating. So I was thinking, well, I'll remember them. But I thought, oh no, I don't want to lose any of them. So, and oftentimes when I'm talking with people who share stories, I mean, with their permission, I say, do you mind if I write this down? And I just like to hold it, and I sometimes weave themes into some of the storytelling I do. And at some point, it was after a few years, I thought to myself, I better look at, I saved all the letters. So it was about 3.5 years of, so at that point there were about 40 plus letters I had. And they were 3-4 pages, you know, of really full story. So I went away to a friend's cottage in New Hampshire, and I had the whole place to myself, and I was staying there with my brother, and I spread all the letters on this huge table, and then tried to make sense of them, to see there's got to be a story here that holds all these stories together. And then I realized it was because you signed each of your letters.
Love, Mary B.
And so I thought, well, that's a great title for a book, Love, Mary B., A Teacher's Gift. And so that's what I did, and I created a sequence because some of the stories weren't so much about being a teacher, but growing up. And well, I guess they all were, because your grandmother was...
My grandmother was a teacher. Her name was Mary. I was named after her, and yes, she was a school teacher.
Yeah, and down in Pennsylvania.
Yes, it's been so long, Alan. My memory is, you know. I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, yeah.
That's right. And,
So you were a teacher for many years, right?
About 40 years, I'd say. Yes, at least 40 years.
Yeah, and you taught little children,
I taught
understand?
kindergarten and first grade. Loved it. Loved those children.
Yeah. So, you know, I fortunately was able to read the book today. And the stories you compiled into a book, which is not quite ready to be published yet.
probably
but
in February, March it'll be coming out. And yeah, so
But I know that you have you've performed the play many times now.
Oh yes,
right?
yes. I think we've done at least
Oh my goodness.
at least 24
Oh,
plus.
at least, yes.
At
Different
universities
venues,
and
universities, churches,
Libraries.
schools, libraries.
Yeah.
whoever will have us.
Right. So what are some of the stories that you remember telling
think.
Alan?
Well, in fact, I was just thinking about this today. I met Martin Luther King Jr. one time. This was back in, I think it was the early summer of 1958, I believe. My friend Portia, she was driving to Purdue University because she was going to teach some religious education courses to a group of church youth educators. So I decided I would ride along with her and take the course myself because my son, Donald, was a teenager at the time, and some of the courses sounded as if they would be quite helpful. So I did that. And I remember every morning we would walk across that beautiful campus to a morning service in the chapel. Dr. King was the preacher. Oh, his sermons were so thought-provoking, so strengthening. To be honest with you, I don't remember much about those courses I took regarding teenagers. But I have never forgotten my brief but blessed contact with that dear man. At the end of that week, we were driving home, and we stayed at a motel on the shores of Lake Erie. We happened to read in their local newspaper that Sputnik, the Russian satellite, was going to orbit our sky that night. So we decided to wait out in the dark. And sure enough, at 10:15, there was this brilliant flash from the east. It rose in a high orbit, and a few seconds later, it was gone. But you know, we knew right then that great changes were coming. All these scientific advances from Russia. And at the same time, back home in America, I know that racial tensions began to increase. So when Portia and I got home that summer, we decided to join a group of lawyers and ministers from the NAACP. We knew a great change was coming, and we wanted to help in some small way if we could. You know, we met often over the next few years, but then in 1968, as you remember, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. It was such a tragedy. I remember my principal at the time, he wanted to hold a memorial service for him in our school auditorium, but I didn't want that. I asked if I couldn't please hold a service in the kindergarten for the little children. I remember I had a picture of Dr. King displayed with black cloth around the frame. I had the children sit in a circle, and we talked, and I told them that I had known Dr. King, that he had little children like them, and that he always taught them to be kind to one another. After we talked some, I had the children stand in a circle and hold hands, and we sang "We Shall Overcome." I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to be with Dr. King. Somehow, I think he strengthened me. And you know, I think he leaves a message of hope that strengthens us all. Special memories.
So that was the message that you took away from your time with him.
Absolutely.
Well, you certainly were blessed to have that.
I certainly was
time.
blessed.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've talked about
remember
that a number of times.
We
since
have,
then,
yes,
yeah.
we have, yes. That was certainly one of the high points in my life.
And your little children in the classroom, how did they receive that story? Do you remember?
Oh, they were all ears. I guess I must have had a knack of telling the story because they were enraptured. And I think they couldn't quite relate to it as an adult would, but they got the message, I think, especially when I told them about the little children that he had and how he taught them to be kind and so forth. Yeah.
Well, I bet they tell that story now.
Yeah, I was
Those
just
children,
thinking that. I was
you
thinking
know?
the same thing. Yeah,
I remember my teacher, Mary B. They wouldn't have called you Mary in those days.
No, they would not have. No, Mrs. B. Special times.
So, in all these years that you have been teaching, what stands out? What has been meaningful to you about your teaching?
You know, oddly enough, I'm thinking back to the time when I retired from teaching. Even though it felt like the right decision at the time, and I was certainly ready to move on to another part of my life, I have to admit that I was feeling a little bit blue the closer that final day came. But you know, during that final week, those sad feelings just seemed to melt away, because I started receiving notes and letters from students that I hadn't heard from in years. They were so sweet and so thoughtful. But you know, the ones that left such a lasting impressions, that meant so much to me, were the stories they told about special moments in our classroom that were so important to them, that left such a lasting impression on them.
Yeah.
Those are the memories that were so meaningful to me, such special memories. I remember how the children in the early grades used to love show and tell, because that was a time when they could share with others something that meant so much to them. And in many ways, I think that's the heart of good teaching. When you can inspire in a child a new discovery, and they can talk about that with others. You know, in that moment, they are so filled with pride, with pleasure, that they practically sparkle. I think that sense of joy is just as rich whether they're in grade school or high school, college, or even beyond. You know, over the years, I attended many teacher conferences, and spoke with many teachers who loved to share ways of teaching and inspiring students. But the ones I remember most were those teachers who just glowed when they talked about the beauty of children discovering and learning and sharing. In many ways, I think that's what happened with little Beth Ann that day when she ran down the hall and burst into my classroom with such joy, shouting, "Here I am!" I wonder if that isn't what happens to all of us when we discover something new. We are overflowing with what we have learned about the subject, but even more so with what we have learned about ourselves. Like little Beth Ann. I find it touching to realize that on my last day of teaching, one of my favorite memories was that of a lost, frightened little girl who taught us all a lesson in joy and in finding her voice.
And this was Beth Ann?
That was Beth Ann, yes. And to her and to all the other children, just too many to count. I am so grateful. They will always be with me.
So tell us about Beth Ann, 'cause she was special to you.
She was very special to me. She was brought into my kindergarten class by a social worker. She had never spoken. She wouldn't talk.
Never spoke.
And they really didn't know why. In fact, they thought maybe she was autistic, but they wanted me to observe her. She didn't speak that whole year, but I was very patient with her and very loving. She was the sweetest little girl. You could see that she was very frightened, but I worked with her that whole year, and she attended a summer school session. And during that summer school session, we had a breakthrough. She spit out some sour milk and said, "Oh, this milk stinks." I thought, well, she hasn't been talking, but she's been listening.
Been listening to the other kids.
Right, right, exactly. So she repeated kindergarten the following year, but by that year, she just blossomed. She learned to talk, write. She just turned out to be a very happy, happy little child.
Well, what do you think was the turning point for her?
I think just the fact that myself and others were very loving, very kind. I think there was some problems at home, and I think this is what kept her into herself, exactly. Yeah. And I think just by patience and loving and understanding, I was eventually able to bring her out of her shell.
Yeah, and say, and be, "Here I am," right?
It's and here I am. When she ever ran into my classroom that day, that just did my heart so much good. She was just so thrilled. I was thrilled.
And so here you are, Mary.
Here I am. Here I am, yes.
Well, I can understand that you were just listening to these stories and thinking, oh my, this has to be preserved. Huh?
Well, and also it was in her writing. Mary has a wonderful way of writing, and then that coupled with hearing her voice on the phone, it was just this wonderful collection. I never thought of them as a part of a book when I was receiving them, but that summer, you know, and then when I took them away, and just it was like this grand puzzle of all these things, and then seeing how they work together, it was like, this is, it felt like, I said to my brother Richard at the time, I said, "It's gold. Richard, come here, I've discovered gold." It's like, and it wasn't intended as a book to begin with, it was intended as a play, and so we've performed the play for several years. And,
right. So you wrote a one-woman play.
One-woman play, right, and then it just has grown, morphed into a book, which is really lovely.
So I'm sitting here listening to your stories, Mary, and I'm trying to remember, you know, high points about myself as a student, as a child. And, you know, I don't think I ever had a teacher like you who was so, you know, who was so delighted with children's learning. The one thing I always remember about my elementary school was in 5th grade, instead of doing the regular lessons, all the learning was based around creating a movie. Maybe that's why I'm here doing this. Creating a movie about Daniel Boone. I probably don't even remember anything about Daniel Boone's life, but we were immersed in his life and all the different aspects of creating the movie, and we all had different parts, you know, different roles in it, and so we learned about history and we learned about writing. I don't know how we ever learned about math that year, but that, you know, that's kind of a high point.
Sure, wonderful experience.
I think probably these days in some classrooms they do a lot more of that, but it hardly ever happens for me.
That's wonderful.
Do you have special memories
Well,
of,
I do.
of teachers?
I mean, in a high school. I was in middle school, junior high school back at that time. I didn't do well in school. I mean, for several years, for a lot of reasons, and I was through a cousin of mine who was a nun, a sister of St. Joseph. I was able to get into Cathedral High School in Boston. Academically, I didn't think I fit in at all. I mean, because I was doing so poorly. But they put me in there on probation. And there was this one nun, Sister Mary Loris was her name. I remember going in and sitting with her in the first classroom, and she glowed like Mary. I mean, it was like she had never met any of us before, and she greeted us at the front of the room. And there was something about her that just, I talked to the other students that were in the same classroom years and years later. They all thought that she was glowing for them. All of us really thrived.
Yeah, everybody felt special.
Right.
She made everybody feel that way.
And if she said something to, even if she was correcting you, she'd say, "Now, Alan, you know, I just want you to see how we can do this in a different way." And she would just be very patient, and I thrived.
Never judgmental, I guess.
No, not at all. Even I remember there was a kid in our class who was troublesome, and she would really take him aside in our presence and saying, "No, you know that's not really helpful to you or the others, right?" But she wouldn't yell at him and be angry, and it was feeling like I was in the presence of somebody who really loved me. And I thrived. I mean, I just did well academically, and I felt like I belonged in that school, and I just thrived for the rest of it. And from that point on, I just loved learning. And but she opened the door, and I can still say it.
Right.
And the first thing she taught us was she taught Latin was amo, which means I love.
Amo, amas, amat.
Amamas, amatas, amat. And she said, so let's say all this together. And we were giggling because it was about love. And she said, but this is what it's about. It's about love. I mean, and that just stayed with me. And all these years, I can still see her. Yeah, so it was wonderful. Yeah. So Sister Mary Loris is the one. And I think all of us at some point have that teacher, like the Daniel Boone teacher, or whoever it is that awakens us to something, right? Yeah. That learning can be something special.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, I've always been turned on by learning.
Oh, good.
And I still am. I still am always, you know, and that's what engages me about people.
Yeah.
You know, is what am I learning from them? I guess maybe that's kind of a selfish attitude.
No, I understand. It's that curiosity, right? Yeah.
A healthy curiosity.
Yes,
Yeah. So I'm so intrigued, though, Mary, because that idea of just wanting children to experience joy in learning, and I really wonder how many children do experience joy in learning.
I know.
Unless they're in a very special environment.
Exactly. Yes, I would hope it's more than we think, but that's such so important,
Yeah. And I think that's the pleasure I take out of sharing Mary's story as a play and also in the book form, because it's not only about people learning about Mary, it's really about maybe reawakening something of a special teacher in their lives, so that they can say, oh, I remember.
Right.
and they can remember that teacher and then bring it back again and share
So
their stories.
I think you've said that after your performances, then people in the audience have been writing letters.
Yes,
right?
at the end of the performance, or when the audience sits in their seats, on the seat is a heading of a letter that says, "Dear Mary B." And so after the play, the audience gets to have an opportunity to talk with Mary B. And then I say to them, so before you leave tonight, if you have anything you want to say to Mary B., just write it there, and then we'll send it. And so at the end of each play, I would collect all of these, and I would make copies of them and keep them at home, and I would send the originals to Mary, you know, in a package. So,
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, so there'd be 30 or 40 letters after each performance that would go down to your home.
Right, to realize how you touched these people, you know, it was just, the letters were beautiful,
Yeah, yeah. So.
very heartwarming.
Yeah. Were there any special ones that you remember?
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while.
I
but,
can remember the one about, there was a woman who also had a grandmother who was a teacher.
Oh.
And then she said, you remind me of my
Yes.
She resonated with that
Right,
story.
exactly, because my grandmother was a teacher. There was a
So it's like
connection
this,
there.
yeah, this wonderful
Right,
thing.
yeah.
So,
Yes, that was a special one.
yeah, so,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, shall we introduce Mary B. as Barbara?
Right.
Okay, I guess I can take the glasses off then.
Oh.
I'm Barbara now, is that right?
Yeah, so you're Barbara Bourgeois?
I'm Barbara Bourgeois, yes.
Yes, and I understand from Alan that you have been performing in many of his plays.
Yes, I have. Thanks to Alan, that's been wonderful working with Alan.
I think we've had, we put on probably about 10 different plays.
Oh, I think
over the
so.
years,
I think so.
that I've
Right,
written.
right. Yeah.
And you've performed Mary B.
I performed
many
Mary
times.
B many times with Alan, yes, as well as other plays that he's written.
Right.
I perform all over the area. I've been doing this for about 30 years now. Yeah. It's my passion. As teaching was Mary's passion, acting is Barbara's passion.
And it's a joy working with Barbara as an actress because some of those plays I've come up with have been really out on the edge, and she said, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this."
Absolutely. I remember several of them. One in particular that stands in my mind is I Love You, I Love You, I Love You Too.
Right.
And it was almost in poetry form. What a talented man this is. And I looked at it and I said, Alan, I can't do this. I had to not recite the poetry, but I had to say it in such a way that I was speaking. I thought I could never do it. It turned out to be probably one of my favorite things I've ever done with Alan. It was wonderful. So I've learned never to say no to Alan. He knows what
Well, I know what you mean. Well, thank you both.
Thank you very
coming.
much for having me. It was
And your book, Love Mary B.,
A Teacher's Gift.
A Teacher's
will be
Gift,
coming out.
you hope will be out in
Yeah.
a couple of months, I
Yes,
guess.
yeah, and I'll be sending it, broadcasting it around the world, and and we have a whole marketing campaign set up, so we'll be, so being here is wonderful. It's great.
It was lovely, and I
Being-
think as Mary sharing her memories, I appreciate you allowing Mary to do that, and
As Barbara too.
as Barbara also. Thank you. It's been lovely.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, so join me next time when we will have a new guest on A Livelihood, New Adventures as We Age.